No, they didn't. Here's why. The FNAF books have always been a controversial subject for debate. Ever since the first one, The Silver Eyes, launched in 2015, fans have debated these books' importance and canonicity to the main game's timeline. Over the years, we got dozens of different books from different series, ranging from seemingly in-universe employee handbooks to dubiously canon short stories. And most of these books are weird. Today, I want to go over the history of the FNAF books, how they affected the lore, whether they're canon to the games or not, and more. I'm Withered Circle. Today, I'm here to answer the age-old question. Did the FNAF books break the lore? The first of many pieces of literature this franchise received was The Silver Eyes, released in December of 2015, the first installment in what would become a trilogy with two other books, The Twisted Ones and The Fourth Closet. The story of this particular book was a mesh of FNAF 1 and 3, with the main protagonists going to Freddy Fazbear's and meeting William Afton, the man behind the slaughter who caused the possession of the Freddy's animatronics. William gets spring-locked and dies, ending the book. The Twisted Ones continues the story of Afton and the protagonist Charlie, with William coming back as Springtrap and revealing to Charlotte that he had killed her many years ago. To clarify, Charlotte Emily, our main character, is the daughter of Henry Emily, William's business partner and the co-founder of Fazbear Entertainment. This meant Charlie was always deeply connected to animatronics and robotics, in more ways than one. Enter The Fourth Closet, most bizarre installment in the trilogy, and the one that wrapped up the story. Turns out, before he died, Henry built a series of Charlie bots, 4 to be exact, meant to pretend to be his daughter and age as she got older. Why? Well, because William wasn't lying. He did kill Charlie when she was a toddler, and Henry was desperate to bring her back. This book goes to some weird places, with the introduction of Remnant and Afton creating Circus Baby's Pizza World, but to put it briefly, Charlie dies at the end, finishing the trilogy on a really weird note. Now, the real question. What connection does this trilogy have to the games? Scott himself said that the Silver Eyes trilogy is not connected to the games in any way. While it's tied to the overall FNAF canon, it does not belong in the same timeline as the games. The contradiction between the lore and stories of these two universes make that distinction pretty clear, but it's always good to have confirmation. These novels were where the FNAF book debate started getting a bit heated, as the debate over whether these novels were in continuity or not was a big deal, and as we're about to see, caused all the modern debates over the book's canonicity. Next on the list, the FNAF Survival Logbook. Released on December 26, 2017, just 22 days after Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator, the logbook advertised itself as an in-universe activity book for kids, with quizzes, drawing challenges, and word searches. But as we all know, there was more to it than met the eye. But before that, brutally eviscerate that subscribe button so I can hit 10k subscribers before the end of the year, and like the video while you're at it. Anyway, back to the video. I won't get into the full lore of the book itself, although if you're interested in that, I have a video about it on screen right now. My point is that the logbook has some serious implications for the lore of one particular character, Golden Freddy. The general consensus surrounding this book is that it does exist in-universe as a book owned by Michael Afton, but the time frame is unclear. While the book contains imagery from the FNAF 3 location, which was only opened in the 2000s, there's details that seem to point to it being much older. For this reason, as with every Five Nights at Freddy's book, the debates around the logbook are ongoing, but at least the general consensus is that it's canon to the game. This is where it gets really serious. I'm skipping over some of the guidebooks like the Freddy Files, Character Encyclopedia, etc. because those just aren't relevant to this discussion. You know what is relevant? These books. The Fazbear Frights short story anthology. This is where it got real bad. Shortly before the release of Into the Pit, the first Frights book, Scott Cawthon told the community that these books were important to the story of the games, with some of the novellas being directly tied to the main universe and some not. This led the community to conclude that while the books weren't in the same universe as the games, they were important to solving it using parallels between the two universes. This idea aged rather poorly. Right from the start, the debate surrounding the books was bad. A lot of people didn't want them to be canon due to their lore implications, with concepts such as Sea Bonnies, Fazgoo, and Matthew Patrick Digital Consciousness Transference MPreg being introduced to the beautiful and totally flawless main timeline. Then, in 2022, we got Tales from the Pizzaplex, a similar series to Frights, but one that seemed much more grounded in the modern timeline with less absurd stories like the last anthology. This is where we were introduced to the Mimic, Edwin, the behind-the-scenes of the Mecha Pizzaplex, and more. Overall, while this series was shorter than its predecessor, it seemed to be much less controversial. That's not to say there aren't debates about both series, however. And finally, over the course of the past half year, we got the brand new interactive novel series, featuring VIP, The Week Before, Return to the Pit, and Escape to Pizzaplex. These books were choose-your-own-adventure style stories that had you controlling different characters from the FNAF universe, for example, Phone Guy. It's basically confirmed that The Week Before is set in the universe of the games, as the synopsis of the book and its author, E.C. Myers, have stated quite clearly. The canonicity of the other books in the series is unclear, but I think all of them except for Return to the Pit are canon to the games. The reason Return to the Pit isn't is because it's stated to be a retelling of the original Into the Pit story, not an original tale. And the book is basically just a choose-your-own-adventure version of the Into the Pit story. But the debates over the canonicity of the books continued. What a lot of people failed to point out while debating Frights and Tales, but specifically Frights, was what Scott said in that first post. Some of the stories are tied to the games. Not all of them. But that's not to say the other side of the discussion was flawless either. If parts of these books were canon, there would be some indication in the games, right? Plus, why would Scott make these books canon if the Novel Trilogy clearly wasn't? And that's without mentioning some of the contradictions these books have to the main timeline. Well, while this debate is still going on to this day, the answer seems to be getting closer and closer. The next big mainline FNAF game, Secret of the Mimic, is just over the horizon, and Steelwool and Scott seem to be tying this huge release to the books. As was said in Steelwool's interview with Dako, if you read the books, you don't know the full story, meaning that Secret of the Mimic will expand on the story of the Mimic and give us the full version of its origins. After all, the Mimic was originally from the books, so it's natural that the games would continue that story. There's other shreds of evidence for the books being canon to the game, such as the Help Wanted 2 DLC and the introduction of Tiger Rock, the Into the Pit game, 5 Laps at Freddy's, and more. To put it simply, this debate has been going on for about 6 years now. There's really no point in continuing this, but we can't help it, especially with the amount of evidence there is for both sides. After all, the answer is extremely important to the lore. So, what's the real answer? Are the FNAF books canon? And if they are, how do they help our understanding of the lore? And do these books overcomplicate everything? Well, let's get right into it. You might have noticed that I brought up contradictions between the books and the games several times during the video, but what are these contradictions? Well, there are several points in the books where the stories and timelines don't seem to match up one-to-one. For example, one of the biggest arguments for the books not being canon is that in Fazbear Frights, we see that William Afton survived FNAF 6 and was taken to a hospital by paramedics, where he was tormented by the vengeful spirit, Andrew. This goes against what we thought happened to him thanks to Security Breach's burn trap ending and what Henry says at the end of his FNAF 6 speech.
Although for one of you, the darkest pit of hell has opened to swallow you whole, so don't keep the devil waiting, old friend.
So, what's the explanation? Well, this one's a bit controversial. Burn trap is not William Afton. We're all familiar with Security Breach's Afton ending. You go down to the ruins of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place, fight Burn Trap, and the Pizzaplex collapses. For the longest time, we all assumed that this charred rabbit corpse thing was what remained of infamous serial killer William Afton, but it's actually quite likely that's not the case. Notice how Burn Trap and Scrap Trap's proportions don't really line up? Furthermore, Burn Trap has added limbs that Afton lost between FNAF 3 and 6. For example, he's not missing his arm anymore. Additionally, his skull is a completely different shape, and Burn Trap's endoskeleton doesn't really look like the one on Spring Bonnie. You know what endo it does look like though? The Mimic's endo. That's right, Burn Trap was never supposed to be William Afton, and Scott Cawthon himself said as much. Burn Trap was originally meant to be a much smaller part of the story of Security Breach, appearing as a minor hallucination, and Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place being the stage for his boss fight was likely not intended by Scott. The Mimic, well, mimics things, particularly William, as we can see in Help Wanted and Help Wanted 2, because at this point it's pretty much confirmed that Glitch Trap is the Mimic. Why this rogue AI is so obsessed with William specifically is an interesting question, but suffice it to say that the Mimic using a dead human as a suit, much like Ennard, to imitate Afton is not out of the question. Mimic is a brutal killer, and we know from the tales from the Pizzaplex epilogues that it will do anything to keep its stride going, including forcefully stuffing itself into a charred human corpse to imitate its serial killer role model. There's other inconsistencies between the books and the games. The shape of the Pizzaplex, Glamrock Chica being yellow, the timeline of the Freddy's locations not lining up perfectly, and so on. But it seems like Scott Cawthon, Steelwool, and everyone else involved with the franchise are doing their best to fix these mistakes as we've seen in recent months, and make the franchise and its narrative fit together better. In that sense, they're doing much better than whatever Security Breach's story was. While they can be complicated to analyze and tie into the games, the FNAF books have genuinely improved the theorizing scene by telling us what happened between FNAF 6 and the modern era, as well as the time period leading up to the construction of the Mega Pizzaplex, which are both hugely important time gaps for the lore. But while that might sound great, the book sharing a continuity with the games isn't without its kinks. There's some weird points in the story that can't be explained away by Scott and his team fixing things, or by it just being a simple inaccuracy. Plus, if the Silverized wasn't in the games, why should Frights be? Can they just be parallel stories like the Novel Trilogy? This is definitely an interesting debate, and one that I've had hundreds of times with other theorists, but to put it simply, there seems to be a lot more evidence for the books being canon than there is for them not being. Those weird stories with Fazgoo and Sea Bonnies aren't part of the core lineup that are actually relevant to the games. Those stories are the ones tied to the Fazbear Frights Stitch Ray Stingers, the epilogues at the end of each book. Stories that seem to be linked to the games actually fit pretty well with the established canon, and since Scott himself said that some of the stories are relevant while some aren't, this lineup is actually pretty solid. Tales from the Pizzaplex had much better quality control, and while some things did slip through the cracks as is inevitable in such a big franchise, there's a better understanding of what's meant to be part of the lore and what isn't. The differing shape of the Mega Pizzaplex Pizzaplex is explained by VIP, where it's said to be under construction, and the inaccuracy that the storyteller had, where Glamrock Chica was yellow like the original Chica, was just fixed by one of the tale's graphic novels, making her white again. There's a lot to this debate, but in short, no. The FNAF books didn't ruin the lore. I think these books actually expanded a lot on the game canon, and can fix, or even solve, a lot of the plot holes and mysteries this franchise has. I think that parts of Fazbear Frights, and the entirety of Tales, are in continuity, and that's a good thing. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the theory, be sure to like and subscribe, but most importantly comment your opinion. Remember to be respectful, and I'll see you all in the next one. That'll be all from me. Bye.